Most people think freedom comes from making more money. It doesn't. Freedom comes from needing less of your future income to hold your life together. And that's why your 40s matter more than most people realize. This is the decade when a lot of people start to look like they're winning. Their income is up, their title sounds better, their house looks nicer, their vacations look more polished. From the outside, everything suggests they've made it. But underneath that picture, something very different is happening. Some people are quietly building a life where work becomes optional later. Others are quietly building a life they'll have to keep funding forever. And from the outside, those two lives can look almost exactly the same. That's the trap. Your 40s are usually the first decade when you have two things at once: meaningful earning power and still enough time for compounding to matter. In your 20s, you had time but not much money. In your 30s, you were likely dealing with expensive years, career moves, housing kids, family pressure, maybe a few financial mistakes, maybe some progress, but not always much room. Your 40s are different. This is when income often starts to feel substantial. And that's exactly why this decade becomes so important. Because if higher income turns into higher assets, your future starts opening up. If higher income turns into a more expensive lifestyle, your future starts narrowing. That's really the whole game. The difference between people who can walk away later and people who end up working much longer than they expected usually isn't one dramatic mistake. It's a pattern. A raise comes in, and the fixed cost of life rises with it. A bonus comes in, and suddenly the standard of normal moves up again. A better year at work comes in, and before long, the life you've built needs that kind of year to happen again. That's how high earners get stuck. Not because they don't make enough, but because too little of what they earn gets turned into something that can support them later. A lot of people confuse income with wealth, but they're not the same thing. Income is flow, wealth is stored strength. Income tells you how fast money is coming in. Wealth tells you how much of your life no longer depends on next month's paycheck. That's why someone making $300,000 a year can still be financially fragile, while someone making far less can be far more secure. One person has a high-throughput life. The other has a growing base of assets. One has to keep producing. The other is slowly reducing how much future labor is required. That's the real divide, not high income versus low income, but funded life versus unfunded life. And your 40s are usually where that divide starts to harden. Picture two people at 40. Let's call them Victor and Trevor. They earn roughly the same amount. They both look successful. They both feel like they've made it compared to where they were 10 years ago. But they use their 40s very differently. Victor treats rising income as permission to expand his lifestyle. Trevor treats rising income as a chance to expand his options. Victor upgrades the visible parts of life first. Trevor upgrades the invisible parts first. Victor tells himself he deserves more because he worked hard. Trevor tells himself every new dollar has a job, and not all jobs are equally valuable. Victor buys comfort, status, convenience, and proof. Trevor buys time, flexibility, margin, and future cash flow. At first, the difference feels small. That's what makes this so deceptive. Lifestyle inflation almost never feels reckless when it's happening. It feels reasonable. It feels earned. It feels incremental. It sounds like we can afford it. It sounds like it's not that much more. It sounds like this is what people at our stage do. It sounds like after everything we've done, why not enjoy it? And that's exactly why it's dangerous. Lifestyle inflation usually doesn't show up as a clearly bad decision. It shows up as a series of socially approved upgrades. A slightly bigger house, a slightly nicer car, private school because it feels like an investment, a more expensive neighborhood because it feels safer, better vacations because you've worked hard, more subscriptions, more convenience, more outsourced tasks, more monthly commitments, more baseline costs that slowly become part of normal life. None of those choices look fatal on their own. But together they raise the cost of your life faster than your freedom can grow. And once that happens, income stops being a tool and starts becoming a requirement. That's why some people can't slow down even after years of earning well. Their life got more expensive, but not more independent. They didn't build freedom, they built a nicer cage. That's what so many people miss about financial progress. The goal isn't just to earn more. The goal is to convert income into independence. And one of the simplest ways to think about that is this: how much of what you earn actually stays with you in a form that makes your future easier? That question matters more than almost any status marker people chase in midlife. Because if every increase in income gets absorbed by life, your financial picture may look bigger, but it isn't getting stronger. You're scaling dependence, not freedom. That's why the most important metric in your 40s often isn't your salary, it's your conversion rate. How efficiently are you turning active income into assets? How much of each raise becomes ownership instead of obligation? How much of your growing earning power is getting locked into future freedom instead of future maintenance? That's the quiet math that ends up deciding far more than most people realize. And this is where the gap between Victor and Trevor starts to widen. Victor sees a bigger paycheck and assumes that means he has more room. Trevor sees a bigger paycheck and asks a harder question. How much of this can I keep from turning into permanent lifestyle? That one question can change an entire decade, because every dollar can do one of two things. It can raise the standard of your life today, or it can lower the amount of labor your future life will require. Most people choose the first by default. Very few consistently choose the second. But by 55, those choices stop looking small. They become structural. Now, this isn't about living like a monk. It's not about never enjoying your money. It's not about turning your 40s into some joyless optimization exercise. It's about understanding trade-offs. Midlife has a way of making almost every spending decision feel justified. You're tired. You're busy. You've worked hard. You want to reward yourself. You want life to feel smoother. You want your family to feel the payoff from all that effort. That's all understandable. The problem is that most people only evaluate what a purchase costs today. They don't evaluate what it costs in future optionality. A bigger mortgage doesn't just cost more money. It may cost more years of required work. A more expensive lifestyle doesn't just cost more each month. It raises the number you need before work becomes optional. A financial decision is never just about the payment. It's about what that payment does to your timeline. That's where the real cost shows up. And that's why your 40s lock in so much. This is the decade when financial choices stop feeling isolated and start becoming systems. A slightly higher housing cost compounds. A slightly higher baseline lifestyle compounds. A slightly lower savings rate compounds. A few more years of delaying investing compounds. A few more years of confusing image with progress compounds. And on the other side, disciplined decisions compound too. A raise that mostly goes into index funds compounds. A paid-off expense that gets redirected into assets compounds. A lifestyle ceiling that stays stable while income rises compounds. A habit of tracking net worth instead of just income compounds. This is where the middle of life becomes either a launch pad or a lock, and most people don't realize which one they're building until much later. To make it concrete, imagine two households. Both increase their income over the next 10 years. One lets spending rise almost step for step with income. The other allows some lifestyle improvement, but deliberately protects a meaningful gap between what comes in and what gets absorbed. That gap is everything. That gap is where freedom lives. Not in the paycheck itself, but in the space between earning and spending. That gap buys investments. It buys margin. It buys resilience. It buys the ability to handle setbacks without panic. It buys the ability to make career decisions from a position of strength instead of fear. Over time, it buys the chance for work to become a choice. And when people fail to protect that gap in their 40s, they often spend the next decade trying to rebuild what should have been created here in the first place. That's why two people with similar incomes can end up with completely different futures. One is using money to send signals. The other is using money to change the structure of life. One is optimizing for appearance. The other is optimizing for optionality. One wants life to look more expensive. The other wants life to require less from them later. That difference is subtle. At 42, it's obvious at 55. One of the clearest places this shows up is housing. A lot of people hit their 40s and decide it's finally time to buy the house that matches their success. And again, that sounds reasonable, but housing has a way of quietly becoming the heaviest anchor in the plan. Not just because of the mortgage, but because a bigger home often brings bigger taxes, bigger insurance bills, bigger maintenance costs, bigger furnishing costs, and a higher lifestyle identity that becomes hard to reverse. It's not just a house. It becomes a platform for a more expensive version of normal. And when that happens, you're not just choosing more space. You may be choosing more dependency. The same pattern shows up with cars, travel, school decisions, social circles, hobbies, and convenience spending. Each one can be justified on its own, but personal finance is rarely decided by one line item. It's decided by the architecture of the whole life. That's the deeper point. Wealth is not just what you own, it's what your life requires from you. If your life requires constant high performance just to sustain itself, you may look wealthy, but you're still exposed. If your life can run on a lower level of earned income because assets, systems, and margin are doing more of the work, that's a very different kind of strength. And it's the kind most people underestimate because it isn't flashy. No one notices your low burn rate. No one congratulates your restraint. No one claps because you kept your spending stable while your income rose. No one sees the quiet decision to redirect a paid-off car payment into investments instead of upgrading the car. But those are often the decisions that determine whether your future belongs to you. And this is where the conversation becomes deeper than just save more money. The real issue is psychological. A lot of midlife overspending isn't about math. It's about identity. People start tying their lifestyle to proof. Proof that the hard work paid off. Proof that they're doing well. Proof that they belong. Proof that they're not falling behind. Proof that all those years of pressure amounted to something visible. That's why lifestyle inflation is so hard to resist. It doesn't feel like consumption. It feels like confirmation. But the problem with using lifestyle as proof is that proof gets expensive. And once your identity depends on the visible shape of your life, it becomes much harder to protect the invisible foundations that would actually make you free. That's the part people miss. The battle in your 40s is not just financial, it's emotional. Can you tolerate looking less ungraded than your income says you should? Can you keep building quietly while other people spend loudly? Can you choose a life that is structurally strong instead of socially impressive? Can you be patient enough to let assets speak later? That patience matters more than people think. Because your 40s are not just a decade of accumulation, they're a decade of path dependence. The decisions you repeat here start locking in your future required income. They shape your financial break-even point. They determine how much pressure your life puts on your career. They decide whether a job loss feels like a crisis or a setback. They decide whether burnout means you rest, pivot, or keep grinding because the machine is too expensive to stop. That's what work forever or walk away really means. It doesn't mean retiring at 45. It doesn't mean abandoning ambition. It doesn't mean quitting the moment things get hard. It means building enough structural strength that work becomes less desperate. It means having enough assets, enough margin, and enough control that you can choose better work, slower work, flexible work, or no work for a while without everything collapsing. That kind of freedom is usually built long before people think they need it. And very often, it's built in your 40s. Not because this decade is magical, but because this is when the math gets serious. This is when raises are large enough to matter. This is when expenses can become permanent enough to hurt. This is when compounding still has time to help, but no longer has endless time to rescue bad habits. That's why this window matters so much. And if there's one mistake people make here, it's assuming they can always fix it later. Later is more expensive. Later has fewer compounding years. Later often comes with more fatigue, more obligations, and less flexibility. That doesn't mean it's too late after 40. It means this is the decade when delay becomes costly in a way it wasn't before. So what should someone actually do with this? First, stop judging progress mainly by income. Income matters, but it's incomplete. Track net worth, track savings rate, track invested assets, track how much of your life could be supported without full intensity work. Track whether your spending drifts upward automatically every time your income improves. What you measure tends to shape what you protect. Second, protect the gap. When income rises, don't let all of it disappear into a more expensive version of normal. Let some of it improve life, sure, but deliberately direct a meaningful portion into assets, not leftovers, not whatever remains, deliberately, because the gap between earning and spending is the bridge between success and freedom. Third question, fixed costs hard. Variable spending matters, but fixed costs shape the structure. Housing vehicles, education, choices, financing decisions, recurring obligations, those are the decisions that quietly determine how trapped or flexible your future self will feel. Fourth, think in years of required work, not just dollars. A purchase isn't only a dollar amount. It may be an extension of dependence. A new expense might not just cost money. It might cost months of future labor. That framing changes decisions fast. And fifth, remember that the goal is not to look disciplined. The goal is to become harder to pressure. That's what assets do. They reduce urgency. They reduce desperation. They give you negotiating power with life. They let you say no more often. They let you recover when something breaks. They let you choose from strength. That's why building wealth is not just about becoming richer. It's about becoming less controllable by circumstance. That's the deeper payoff. And if you get that right in your 40s, the benefits echo for decades. Because eventually, compounding starts doing what salary alone never could. It starts separating your time from your labor. It starts giving you a life that doesn't need to be earned from scratch every single month. That's the shift most people are actually looking for, even if they don't describe it that way. They don't really want a more expensive life. They want a life with more room to breathe, more room to choose, more room to slow down, more room to pivot, more room to walk away from what no longer fits. And that room is usually built much earlier than people think, quietly, gradually, without applause. So if you're in your 40s, here's the real question. Are you using your highest earning decade to upgrade your image, or to reduce the number of future years you'll be forced to sell? Because that's what this decade is really deciding. Not whether you look successful, whether you're becoming free,